Welcome to Bed Crime Stories podcast. I'm your host, T. Hello, bed crimers. Hope you're all well and having a great day. Please like, share, and subscribe. Because Lori Vallow Daybell's trial for conspiracy to unalive her fourth husband, Charles Vallow, was held in my town and state, Phoenix, Arizona, I was able to attend 2 days of the trial this week. And yes, on YouTube, unfortunately, I have to avoid the M word that rhymes with herder. One of the things I want to share with you are the sights and sounds and events of what it's like to go to one of these big true crime trials. So that's part of what I'm going to talk about today. I'm also going to touch on key evidence that the prosecution hopes will result in a guilty verdict. But before I do that, let's talk about what happened in court late this week. The prosecutor, Trina K., rested the state's case on Wednesday, and Lori Vallow Daybell, who is representing herself, decided to rest as well, even though she did not put on a defense, at least until the judge, soft on the eyes, Judge Justin Berensky, cautioned her that if she wants to testify on her own behalf, she cannot declare that she's rested, because once she does that, she cannot change her mind. Of course, the only witness Lori could call at this point about the events on July 11th of 2019 is herself. Everyone else who was at her leased house in Chandler, Arizona that day, when Charles Vallow ended up lifeless on the living room floor, is no longer alive. That would include her youngest children, JJ and Tylee, her brother, Alex Cox, and of course, Charles Vallow. As for other potential witnesses, Lori failed to send out subpoenas in time to allow the state to interview those people, so no witnesses could have been called anyway other than Lori. Lori, the state, and the judge agreed to resume the trial on Monday with closing arguments and then jury instructions. And Lori, despite saying twice that she has no intention of putting on a defense, still has to formally rest her case in front of the jury. So she does have some time in which to change her mind. Will she ruminate all weekend in her jail cell? I suspect so. I've heard people call her a narcissist and a psychopath, and if all that's true, she may just do the unexpected and testify. And I'm secretly crossing my fingers that she does, because boy, oh boy, would that be fun to see. Cue the Sauvignon Blanc and the buttered popcorn. If you're invested in this case, then I'm pretty sure you want to see that as well. Please, Lori, sashay up to the stand and testify. We're all ears. But of course, her side of the story, in my opinion, is a fairy tale full of lies. On Friday, Lori, prosecutor Trina K., and Judge Berensky reviewed the jury instructions. The plan is for closing arguments on Monday, as well as jury instructions. Lori's input on Friday on those instructions was really important, although I'm not sure she realizes it. But then again, in some ways, you could say she's got nothing to lose because she already has multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole in Idaho. I heard former Judge Mel McDonald of Arizona tell reporter Justin Lum of Fox 10 Phoenix News that actual defense attorneys, if they see something in the jury instructions that they don't want, object and question anything and everything. And this is really important because, according to McDonald, one of the most important reversals of convictions comes from erroneous jury instructions. Lori, because she's not an attorney, doesn't know when to object. She doesn't understand how important it is to not miss opportunities to object. And on Friday, per McDonald, Lori did miss those opportunities. She doesn't know what she doesn't know. Per McDonald, it's in her closing arguments where Lori will probably try to testify. She'll likely blurt out what she wants to say, even if the state objects, because once the jurors hear something, it's hard for them to unhear those things, even if the judge tells them to ignore that. She did this throughout the trial when she made comments after witnesses answered questions. The judge had to slap her hand multiple times over this, but that was her testifying. She said what she wanted to say, the state objected, the judge sustained the objection, and the jury was told to disregard disregard Lori's comments. Mel McDonald said that there are multiple smoking guns that he believes are going to get Lori convicted. He cited, 1, the chilling text messages, like the one where she references having to be like Nephi, which the state tried to show meant that Lori would have to act like Nephi, who in the Book of Mormon ordered the death of Laban. 2, her giddy, happy demeanor on the day of the crime. 3, her failure to dial 911 ever, and Alex waiting 47 some minutes before making that call. 4, going around with her children, shopping for flip-flops, and getting breakfast for JJ at Burger King. McDonald quipped that Lori has a better chance of winning the lottery than getting an acquittal. He also believes that the jurors have witnessed Lori's hypocrisy, particularly when she accused witness Nancy Jo Hancock of dating a married man when she herself was the one having an affair with Chad Daybell. The former judge believes the jurors can see through Lori. He also said that if the jurors get the jury instructions by 3 p.m. on Monday, say, they could very possibly have a verdict by 5 p.m., and they probably don't want to have to come back on Tuesday, so they likely won't deliberate long, if at all. But of course, none of us knows the jurors individually. Some may get stuck on the fact that nowhere in the evidence was Lori shown to have used Charles' name when talking about unaliving someone. Will the jurors accept that Ned was a nickname for Charles? Moving on to my experience attending this high-profile trial. Because of the limited seating in the courtroom, anyone in the public wanting to attend the trial has to get to the courthouse early, like 3 hours before the trial is set to begin. The courthouse opens at 7:30 a.m., so you show up outside before that and you stand in line with other people, mostly women, but also a few men, waiting for the door to open so you can make a mad dash through security, get onto an elevator, and hustle up to the 5th floor to claim a seat outside the courtroom. Some of the people standing outside the courthouse could be expert witnesses in a sense because they are so well versed in Lori Vallow Daybell's criminal history. Some of them even attended every day of both Lori and Chad Daybell's trials in Idaho. One guy is writing his 3rd book on the case. I believe he was a juror on Lori's trial in Idaho. What's cool is that everyone there is like-minded in the sense that they have an interest in this case and in true crime. I will go so far as to say everybody wants Charles Vallow and his family to get justice. I didn't hear anyone say anything remotely kind about Lori Vallow Daybell. Once up on the 5th floor, you can take a breather, knowing you will probably get into the courtroom. This is when the 3-hour wait for court to begin goes down. Some people begin talking about the case. Some podcasters start tapping away at their laptops. The noise level goes up pretty quickly without anybody noticing. The reporters turn up closer to the hour when the trial is set to begin. Nate Eaton of East Idaho News eventually comes off the elevator. He tends to go to a seat where he can have his back to the crowd. It's clear that he's always in serious work mode, and the only way for him to do what he needs to do is to mostly be left alone. So he's giving off the vibe, please stay away, as you can clearly see I'm working, and who can blame him? He's got so much work to do each day. There are other podcasters who've been hired as consultants to the big true crime channels like Court TV and the Law and Crime Network. They too are deep in work mode, and you can tell they've been working practically 24/7 and haven't gotten enough sleep. But you can also tell that they're a little high on their success and loving what they get to do for a living. And I'm not going to lie, I would love to get to go where they are in their careers. There's a sense that all of these reporters must work, and they too cannot be derailed by public spectators wanting to say hi and chit-chat for more than maybe a few sentences. They have to sit all day, take copious notes, run to their hotels or Airbnbs after the court session, try to put their notes into a script or maybe an outline so that they can do a live show later with their followers. It's mad crazy. So with all that frenetic activity and all those sounds, it can get too loud in this space. So then the police officers who are there to keep order shout at the crowd. The officers serving as security threaten to kick everybody out, except maybe the media. Then one or two public spectators take on the important job of shushing everybody when the noise creeps back up. Nobody wants to get kicked out. There are also small skirmishes over someone maybe saving a seat for someone else who didn't suffer the misery of getting to the courthouse 3 hours early at dark 30. So as you can surmise, it's a very stimulating and fun experience for me, overwhelming at times because I'm used to sitting at my desk at home in a quiet space, researching, writing, and recording. But I was so fortunate to meet some wonderful women who came from LA to attend the trial. They feel like they're my new friends. Think of the kind of women that you'd like to go to happy hour with. I also have the privilege of meeting Annie Cushing, who is the sister of Lori's third husband, Joe Ryan. Annie is amazingly warm. Her intelligence is obvious. Her knowledge of this entire case is probably better than anybody else's. In fact, if you're interested in seeing a timeline of all the events surrounding these crimes, check out the link in the description. Not only does Annie plot out the events chronologically, she also shares info that many people who did not read the FOIA documents aren't aware of. In addition, she cites her sources and links back to them. I was blown away by this document and by Annie. She is another human being deeply affected by these crimes. Tylee Ryan was her niece. She spent time with Lori, Tylee, and JJ many months after Joe Ryan was found dead in his new apartment in Phoenix, Arizona on April 3rd of 2018. Let me read you a quote from Annie's timeline. Joe was estimated to have died 1 to 2 weeks before he was found, although Dr. Amy Salerno, who was interviewed twice by the Profiling Evil podcast, noticed that he wasn't moderately decomposed, as the autopsy stated. He was profoundly decomposed. This would indicate he was probably deceased closer to 2 weeks, which is what the police report stated. I know from looking at the pics from the 4-3 welfare check that it's evident Joe's body imploded when first responders tried to move it by the extreme amount of blood on the mattress after they moved him. This would provide a possible overlap with the time Charles was out of town for his mother's funeral. Just noting the overlap, not accusing Lori of playing a role in Joe's death. That said, I did a live about possible signs of foul play on my Annie Lennox YouTube channel before starting A Murderous Heart, end quote. A Murderous Heart is the name of her new YouTube channel, or I should say her most recent YouTube channel. Annie believes that it's possible Lori unalived Joe Ryan. I also believe that's a possibility. Of course, it's just speculation, but we know Lori hated Joe. She also received a payout of $64,964.52 from Joe Ryan's life insurance policy, as well as monthly Social Security benefits for Tylee. And Lori never bothered to contact Annie and her siblings to let them know that Joe was dead. Joe's body, as a result of this, sat in the morgue for a very long time before the state decided to cremate him. Now, what I learned from various members of the public during those 3-hour waits on the 5th floor is that the families personally affected by all these brutal crimes, including Lori Vallow Daybell's birth family, her only living child, Colby, Charles Vallow's sister, Kay Woodcock, the extended Connor family, which is Lori Vallow's mother's family, Annie Cushing, all of them are dealing with a lot of emotional pain. And unfortunately, there are fractures throughout the entire familial network. The thing that people need to understand is that the facts are the facts. If there's evidence that points to someone maybe being aware of Lori and Alex's evil plans and failing to alert Charles Vallow and the cops, you can't sweep that shit under the rug. It's going to lead to major upsets and accusations among all these people. This is, after all, a real-life story where multiple people ended up dead. It's bound to unearth dirty little secrets among family members. Everything gets looked at, investigated, documented, and scrutinized. So yes, there are some bad feelings among some of these people. Moving on to sights and sounds inside the courtroom during the trial. The jurors were mostly stone-faced from what I saw. They didn't betray anything on their faces for the 2 days I was there, so it's impossible to know what they're thinking. Only maybe 3 to 4 of them appear to be taking notes, which is sort of surprising. How are they going to remember the timeline of events, the phone calls? I guess they can ask to see the evidence, but still, you'd think they'd be wanting to take notes. But are some of them maybe saying, this chick is whack and guilty as F, so I don't need to take notes? Could that explain the one juror who looks tired and bored all day, who rests his head on his hand, and who fails to write anything down? Is he like, she's guilty, let's just get out of this freezing cold, windowless courtroom? FYI, Lori was wearing a black pantsuit with a medium-hued purple blouse on Wednesday. On her feet were chunky-heeled black shoes or ankle boots. It was hard to see because she was wearing black socks. She had her feet crossed and was often moving her foot up and down. She only turned around a few times to talk to her legal advisors. She didn't look into the gallery very much. I really wanted to catch her eyes just to experience what that would feel like. Would I feel a sinister, icy shiver down my spine? Unfortunately, I never got the chance. Lori only looked over to the jury from time to time and to her legal counsel. Usually when she looked at the jury, from what I could see, she had a smile on her face. She looked surprisingly well rested, considering she has to get up at 3 a.m. to make it from the jail to the courthouse. Charles Vallow's sister, Kay Woodcock, was in court, as was Megan Connor, who is Lori Vallow's cousin on her mother's side of the family. Colby Ryan was not in court on Wednesday, but he said he's going to attend on Monday. During the testimony of Detective Duncan of the Chandler PD, who was the only witness on the last day of the state's case, we learned that Lori's sister, Summer Shiflett, texted Lori on July 10th, 2019, which was 1 day before Charles was unalived, and said, quote, "I will unalive him myself if that's the case," end quote. Of course, she did not use the word unalived. Since this was made the day before Charles died, it's not a stretch to think that Summer was likely talking about Charles. And if it was about Charles, that seems very damning. How much did Summer know about Lori and Alex's plans for July 11th and for Charles? Could she have prevented this senseless crime? I'm sorry, but Summer, unless her head is not screwed on right, should have tried to stop this madness if she knew about it, not offer to help unalive Charles or do it herself. Just my opinion. The last day of the state's case saw prosecutor Trina Kay walk through all the elements she believes prove Lori conspired with Alex Cox to unalive Charles. The elements included 1. Important dates spanning from when Lori met Chad to when she married him after Charles' death. 2. Emails and text messages between key players in which they discuss the intervention Charles had planned for Lori and the goal of unaliving the dark spirit named Ned, Garrett, or Hiplos that had taken over Charles' body per Lori and Chad. 3. The key events that transpired before, on, and after July 11th, 2019, when Charles ended up dead on the floor of the house he leased for Lori. Trina shared key dates like when Lori met Chad Daybell, when they began their affair, when Lori went MIA for weeks, leaving Charles to care for JJ alone without knowing where Lori was and or if she was going to come back, when Charles stumbled on the email where it appears to be Lori pretending to be Charles to ask Chad Daybell to come and help him write a book. That email, I believe, was designed for Tammy Daybell to see so that she would not be suspicious when Chad left home to spend time with Lori in another state. Charles immediately knew Lori was having an affair with Chad Daybell, and he even contacted Tammy Daybell to tell her about it. We also saw the agreement Charles signed for a 3-year lease on the house in Chandler for Lori, as well as the invoice for Lori and Chad Daybell's quickie marriage in Hawaii, ukulele included. I'm just kidding. I don't know that the ukulele was included. Trina also went through the emails and text related to Charles and Adam Cox's plan to hold an intervention with Lori to get her temple privileges revoked and to try and break through her delusions to bring her back to her former self, as well as the messages between Lori and Alex related to the alleged conspiracy plot to unalive Charles, as well as other cryptic messages between Lori and Chad, Lori and her niece Melanie Boudreau, now Pulowski, and Lori and her sister Summer. Detective Duncan and the prosecutor walked the jurors through the physical timeline of July 11th, showing when Charles arrived at the house in Chandler. Also showing when he stopped responding to text messages from Adam Cox, when Alex Cox finally dialed 911 after 47 minutes of leaving Charles unattended and deceased on the floor, when Lori arrived at the Burger King with JJ and Tylee to get breakfast for JJ, when Lori hit up that Walgreens for flip-flops, because she said they both ran out of the house that morning barefoot to flee from Charles, when Lori allegedly used Charles' security PIN number to access his phone hours later after taking Charles' phone from him and driving away in his rental vehicle, when Lori, Alex, and Tylee drove over to Alex's house later that afternoon, when the 3 of them were called down to the Chandler Police Department, when Lori called Social Security about benefits post Charles' death, when Lori called the life insurance company to claim the $1 million she thought she was going to be the beneficiary of. You get the idea. I'm not going to go through all of it because it's really a lot. Wednesday left me feeling incredibly sad, and a big reason for this was a photo that the prosecution shared. The photo was of Charles lying deceased on the floor in the home. The home, by the way, which I've said before, was leased and paid for by Charles, and the paperwork shown in court illustrated that he'd leased the property for 3 years. I believe Charles was hoping that he and Lori and JJ and Tylee could live together in that home. So he had every right to be at that property on July 11th when he was invited there by Lori to pick up their son, JJ, and take him to school. I suspect Charles was lured inside against his better judgment, probably with a lie like, "Come on in, JJ isn't quite ready," or, "Hey, JJ doesn't want to go to school today. Do you want to come in and try to coax him out of here?" Because let's face it, Charles must have known that this was not a good idea, that it was dangerous, especially since Lori had already threatened his life, and he knew that Alex Cox was inside the home as well. And that is a strange thing to see because Alex had a house not far from there. And if Charles knew that Lori maybe played a role in her third husband, Joe Ryan's death, that would be all the more reason to meet outside and preferably in a public space with other people around. The photo of Charles on the floor needed to be shown to help explain how his lifeless body was found when the police arrived after the 911 call, and to show the blood that was on his left hand, on his thumb, and in the area between the thumb and the next finger, an area that Detective Duncan described as the webbing. Detective Duncan believes Charles, after being shot, and in the mere seconds to 1 to 2 minutes maybe he may have survived, placed his left hand on his heart, which is where the first projectile tore into his chest. I'm going to leave it at that for today, and I will see you next time on Bed Crime Stories. Please like, share, and subscribe.